watching In Time with Nicholas Lamar Suter. He's so dreamy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Downtime. Thank you so much for joining us. With me, as for the most part, pretty much always now, is Commander McMillan. Lance, how are you? So,
as well as could be expected.
Well, and then there was I was thinking I was going to drop in on the shills, and then there was one other show, and I'm like, okay, I got like 4 hours of sleep last night. I was just like, I remember when I used to be able to do that. I also now with the new green screen thing, I realized this cup may not be the right. It's just gonna. I'm like, okay, maybe you should just get. Because like people like
you have your hand out there, and then suddenly the cup materializes.
Yeah, it's just like getting used to the new technology. Oh dear Lord. So oh my God, it was really good to see Starsky. I'll say it was a little awkward and strange, and I think mostly because for me, almost nothing's changed. I think for you, almost nothing's changed in terms of the show, how we do it, and everything like that. But for him, he's in another country doing something completely different, and it's like, I'm so delighted for him. Though he sounded like so happy and healthy, and he's I was really happy for him. So I was so delighted that we got to do that. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'd like to also reach out. You know, we obviously take. I mean, somebody said that was recorded. What I said at the beginning of the last show. That wasn't. I did that. I just did that, and you were there. I didn't have a script or anything. I was just like, this is what I felt like saying before the show started. And we've been. I'm gonna brag. I'm gonna brag on your behalf because you're too humble. So I'm going to brag on your behalf in a minute. But In Time's been covering this since it started. And you remember, that was actually, we brought you on to discuss a number of things, but we brought you on largely in a recurring role to discuss Ukraine. And I remember a couple of things. First of all, being proud that we were covering it live before anyone else, because so we're sitting here and we're pretty sure it's going to happen. So the research team is just like, go, and then one of our regulars hits us up with I've got a 7-mile long column of troops in Crimea that are headed towards the unoccupied part of Ukraine, and like, oh wow, we geolocated it. It's legit, and it looks legit. At least it's been posted on Facebook. Nobody else, there's nothing on mainstream media covering this, and we're like, How do we really know for sure that this is real? Because that's our biggest problem. One of the ways we break stories before everybody else is we get it off of social media. So there's no reporters there. This is what people are seeing live. Problem is, you got to verify it, because you don't want to like get somebody like, we're going to do a George Orwell thing at some point. It's like, aliens have landed. It's like, here's the evidence. We're going to cause it anyways. So somebody was just like, does Google traffic work in Crimea? Like, that's a really good question. Sure enough, there it is, 7 long miles. So we got you on, and I remember saying, okay, are they going for the first third of Ukraine, the second third, or all of it? And you said this, and I was blown away, because I knew nothing about Ukraine, and you hadn't prepped for the show, at least that I'm aware of, and you just said, we'll know that easy enough. It's going to be Odessa. I was just like, how the hell do you know that? He said, well, they're either they have to deal with it because it's on the water. So either they're going to bomb the living daylights out of it and just destroy it, in which case they have no interest in going west of the Dnipro, or if they want to take the whole country, that's a great staging area to hit everything west of it. So if they land amphibious troops there, the goal is to take the whole country. So we're sitting there going, and literally as you said that, we got the report in, amphibious troops landing on the Dnipro, or not, sorry, landing in Odessa. And I'm like, well, I guess we know what the Russians are going to do now. So it's been a delight having you on, and your expertise has always been. So there you go. I remember that. Fond memories, Starsky, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. So one of the things so please, if you were going to add anything, I don't want to overrun you there.
No. I was taking a nap about half an hour before we started the show, and during said nap, I forgot that I needed to take my medication. So I'm in the exciting standpoint right now of the leg is saying, "You're a horrible person, you forgot me." So it's reminding me that it's still there. Yes, I'm
going to see the occasional grimace, and then I have been trying to get a hold of your wife and get her to just could you just give me some screenshots of him when he's just really had like the highest doses of the meds possible, and it'll end up getting into the cold open somehow by accident. I mean, we need the titles are just they've gotten boring at the end. I want to just drop in like she so far hasn't been. I have not found anything to get her to do that. Simos, really good to see you. Good to see everyone in the live chat with Simos. It has been way too long, and I appreciate the occasional check-in. So thank you, my friend. It's really good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Glad to see everybody in the live chat. There's a couple of things we could talk about. The J.D. Vance, the leaked dossier. It looks like Trump was getting a dossier on all his potential running mates, and then Iran hacked the Trump database and stole the dossier that Donald Trump prepared on J.D. Vance. And so the media has had it. They are nervous about releasing it for any number of reasons. I will tell you, kind of reminds me of the Steele dossier, which was in fact Oppo research. It was the Republicans doing opposition research on Trump, and the Democrats didn't do that. They released it, but they did. There's how could the Democrats say these things? The Republicans said these things. In fact, they paid for it. But at any rate, and then
I think that's the key is. I was going to say, I think it's the key is that everybody does opposition research on the other side, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's part of the political process, and everybody understands that. It's when you're taking foreign money or hiring foreign intelligence agencies to do the gathering of that information for you that it becomes questionable.
Or when you invite them to your tower to have a meeting, and literally the defense. So the Mueller report, I think it was the Mueller report,
yep,
that said that you couldn't really convict Donald Trump Jr. because he was too stupid to have the mens rea to have realized that what he was doing was illegal, and because he was so blatant about the fact that he was violating all these laws. It's just you can't. You're just going to argue he's too dumb to convict him.
The documents, the file starts growing like that.
And he went out and publicly said, "Yeah, you can't convict me because while we tried to collude with the Russians, they said no." So I guess attempted murder is not a thing anymore either. Okay. So I'm sorry, you were saying
why? Yeah. I understand why they would be interested in Vance, but you would think that they would try to find compromising material to potentially release on the other side. The only question is whether the Iranians see a second Trump presidency as more of a threat because he's so buddy-buddy with Netanyahu. So that's the question I think that really needs to be asked.
So right now, the New York Times, most news organizations don't want to release this. There is a I think he's a reporter with the Times who said he may just do it on his own. No, in fact, I think he has done it on his own. 𝐶𝐚𝐬. And you can download the entire dossier that's been done. Basically, when he reached out to the Trump campaign, they said the reason this hack happened and the dossier was released, they don't deny apparently that the dossier is accurate, was because Iran is terrified of another Donald Trump presidency, and they know that under Kamala Harris, the United States will collapse, so they're deliberately trying to sabotage the Trump campaign.
Must be, yeah.
Must be. That's got to be it. So there are 4 lights exactly.
Look, the rabbit hole. Let's go spelunking.
So I missed. I wanted to catch Vice President Harris and Zelensky and their press conference. I know that Speaker Johnson's been getting really pissed about that because he's just so like, well, you know, it's election interference, yada yada yada. That's fine. He can say that all he likes to, since he's not part of the executive branch. I mean, what the fuck, really? He's just trying to get attention. So he doesn't get to enforce the law. So we were going to talk about those, but there was also the thing that you and I were talking about, and we talked a lot about Russian propaganda, Russian kompromat, and how it works. We've had this conversation before. I think you and I both find it fascinating. Most people don't know this. I was one of the last, you know this, because you've heard this story about 100 times, which is I was one of the last Americans out of the USSR. I was basically leaving at the time. I didn't know anything was going to go wrong. I was almost shot over a slight miscommunication about bribing a customs official. There was a number of, I think even one AK-47 aimed at you is too many, but I had like 7 or 8 at the time, and it's just a little overwhelming. I was like 18 or something.
You realize, Nick, it's not a terribly accurate weapon, so that quantity is important.
Well, they were all they're all up over there. Like there's still a couple down here, which were the more intimidating ones. Was the ones that were right up next to me. But there was like this like catwalk, and they're all like aimed at me, and I'm like, these are the and the customs official that I apparently failed to bribe a sufficient amount. Who knew? You know, kind of came out, was like, yeah, he's a dumb American. It's just like, yes, listen to him. And fortunately they believed him. And so I got on the plane, and by the time the plane landed, the USSR was gone. I was just like, wow, that was interesting. But you know, I studied the language, I studied the culture. I was there for about a month while it was the USSR. I had thought that culturally it would change after that, and you and I have since spoken a great deal about Russian culture, and it's amazing that you and I can identify elements of it, which tells me that nothing has changed in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
I think there was a narrow window where change could have been effected. Mm-hmm. But what happened was those with a degree of power, effectively those who've been in middle management during the communist era, figured out that they could grab everything, and they become the oligarchs who own everything. And rather than having, as we did with our constitutional convention and such, where you put together a state that at least acknowledges the little people exist and deserve some amount of rights, with the Russians, it was just like, no, this is the way it's always going to be, and this is the way it's always been. The boyars or the commissars or whatever new name we're going to give them this week, we're in charge. We get to make all the decisions, and the rest of you are chattel. So I think, honestly, there was a fairly brief period, say from, 1990 to maybe 2000, 2005, somewhere in there, that if they'd had the right people and the right constellation, to bring it together as a semi-transparent, semi-representative nation, that they could have gotten out of the mess they find themselves back in yet again.
It's really pretty easy. I'm about to go down a rabbit hole. So instead of what is it? Talking Russia, and this is great. I'm waiting until your meds arrive. I'm going to ask you like really serious existential questions. As you know, so the very first, as human beings first started to become social creatures, and as we first started to really learn to form tribes, we were limited to roughly about 24 to 27 for the same reason that apes are actually still limited to that. You have to be able to see the leader, and you have to be constantly reminded that there is somebody who's in charge that is near you, and if you wander too far off. But we learned to find ways around that and to grow into larger circles, although we still seem to have kind of that limitation. So the limitation of your most immediate, like people that are just slightly above acquaintance. They may not be a friend, but people that you know something about. You're still actually limited to about roughly 24 before your brain just goes, and that includes family, close friends, whatever. So, but we've managed to try to build sustainable societies. In the U.S., we really don't think much about the successes or failures of other societies. We don't teach it all that much. I was delighted that my daughter was learning that 24 million people starved to death in Russia. People were starving to death in China 10 years ago and maybe on their way there now. In the U.S., we've been relatively successful and comfortable with that. But as a society grows, it has to find a way to deal with people who all want power, people who want a voice, and people who will ultimately kill for said power or voice if they don't get at least some form of representation. There have been many methods tried throughout human history to do this. China has been going, minus the starvation, for quite some time in one form or another. So has Russia. Is it safe to say that basically we're talking the same thing that they were warning us of in the 80s that really felt like a scare tactic, and I still kind of think was, but nonetheless, the idea that this is really a battle about two ideologies. One ideology that says we're going to have freedom, but that is going to come at the cost of some security and so on and so forth. Or, no, we're going to have one person for the most part in charge. He's going to delegate sort of from the top, and everybody's going to just hop on board where that train is going, and that's the most efficient and best way to maintain a society.
I think that the latter of the two models is the one that humans most naturally fall into. We tend to defer to somebody above us who takes the reins of power and does what they want with it. It's when they get out of line that people start getting flustered. The issue is how those people get to the top and how they stay on. And I think that's the key difference, is that in Western society, and I hate saying it that way because it sounds so parochial, so colonistic, if you will. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, the dog agrees.
Yeah. The issue is that in a, quote, Western society, when the boss starts getting out of line, we have at least some cursory amount of procedure in place to counteract that. And I don't think that in authoritarian regimes they have that, because it threatens the very existence of the person on top. He thinks it's all about the stern, demanding, authoritative father, where you beat the kid until he does what you want, as opposed to the more nurturing parent who, oh, it's okay, here, I'm going to guide you down the path of righteousness, that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of the difference, in that how you view the most effective form of parenting translates as you get older, and how you see government. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does, and as someone who has on occasion said, I don't need a map. I I do get it now. Is this why Putin has to do his shirtless? I'm a man on a you know, doing the.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, there's another thing that I noticed about Russian culture, and this is going to sound a little crazy. I'd like to see if you concur. It's been my experience that really there's almost this idea that it's not even almost. I think you can safely say that for the most part in Russia, every woman wants to have sex with Putin and every man wants to be Putin on some level. Is that going too far, or is that, you think, on some level?
It's a gross overgeneralization, but yeah, I think there's some accuracy to it. And
I think you put it,
it's
yeah,
not,
there you go.
Yeah, it's not exclusive to Russia. So in Russia, you get Vladimir riding the horse shirtless. We saw similar thing, for example, with I believe it was Yeltsin, where he's not, posing on a horse shirtless because he's a little blob of a guy, but he's down there obviously drunk off his gourd, partying with people on the beach or something. But it's trying to show that he's a man of the people, that there's something relatable about him. And then you translate that over to our country, where you have these ridiculous pictures that sometimes emerge of a politician who's never been in the military, but goes to some military base to pose next to a tank, or, get on the bow of the ship and do the "I'm king of the world" pose. It's just, for some reason, that appeals to a certain set of the population.
So let's assume that Ukraine can make enough advances into Russia that they can make some trade to get their land back for Russian land that they have now taken. Let's assume that somehow there's an equitable way out of this, and that Putin gets what you have repeatedly said he's going to need to get, which is his mission accomplished moment. In fact, actually, could you explain what you meant when you said that?
The mission accomplished moment is something that we got with the Bush administration, where we invaded Iraq and took Baghdad and toppled the Ba'athist regime. And to do that proud victory moment, you get President Bush on the deck of the aircraft carrier with a mission accomplished banner flying from the bridge. The photo moment of, look how great we are. We did what we said we were going to do. And then everybody conveniently forgets that mission accomplished then led into a 12, 15-year occupation where we lost probably 20 times the number of people we lost during the actual taking of the country. The mission was not accomplished. That's the problem, is that nobody really defined a logical mission or thought through what the parameters of victory was going to be. And I think that's the issue here with Putin and what he's done with Ukraine, is he got started in it and figured, it's going to be an easy waltz into Kiev, hold a victory parade, everybody will cheer, and now it's not happening, and this war's going to drag on. He needs some way he can hang that mission accomplished banner on the Kremlin so he can come off as a guy who did something great to help Mother Russia. Because if he doesn't do that, then the oligarchy around him are all going to see him as weak, and they'll start plotting.
And those plots, that again, as opposed to the more Western system, when people plot against you here, usually it's to plot to get your seat taken from you, and yada yada yada. Over there, it's plotting to find a window.
The transition of power.
Yeah, which is a little
transition of power. And January 6th, that's why it upsets people so much, is what we saw was what we thought was going to be the usual peaceful, systemical transfer of power. And then the guy who lost tries to basically stage a coup to seize power for himself. It's never happened before. And so that's why so many people are so upset over the thing.
Well, in fact, George Washington
Yeah.
could have become that tyrant. I mean, he was popular enough, and instead he handed over his power. And it's we could have ended up in the Russia scenario, but that's why that famous painting is so important, and we were very close to it in as much as it was possible.
I think it's I think it's two things, though. And this is what, to my mind, makes Washington great. Number one is that they really couldn't conceive of a government without a king, and they offered him the kingship. You're going to be king of America. And he said, no, we're going to do something else. We're going to find a way to make a republic where there's representatives from every state. We're all going to work together. We're going to find a peaceful way. We're not going to have hereditary idiots in charge anymore. And the second thing is that after the end of his second term, he said, I'm not going to run for president anymore. And that established a pattern that held until FDR, and then was formally codified into law after FDR had finished, which is that, no, you get two rolls of the dice. Your game is over. Somebody else gets to move in. Because the mores of a historical period change, and we need to have a system that reflects that kind of change, that we move onward, and it keeps cycling through the different archetypes that constitute the people.
So if Ukraine is able to give Putin his mission accomplished moment, and it's not just going to be Ukraine, we're going to have to find some way that he can go on television and say the Americans are terrified of me now because whatever it is, I don't know, maybe but I've noticed this ever since I got into the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is that one of the interesting things is my father always used to say you can either do something or you can take the credit for it. And if you can realize which side needs what, Kennedy didn't need to win that. He really just needed to look like he won that. Having said that, Khrushchev didn't need to look like he could win it because he could fake that easily enough. But the Politburo would know whether he won or not. So by agreeing to remove the Jupiter missiles, we actually lost that exchange, but it looked like we won because in the short term he pulled out. We're like, Kennedy stood toe-to-toe with the Russians, and guess what happened? And so Kennedy got what he needed, which was the appearance of victory, and Khrushchev got what he needed, which was an actual victory, not necessarily a huge one because nuclear weapons being what they are, but it was a net gain for Russia, and everybody who needed to know in Russia knew it, and they could just sell whatever else they needed to. So Putin's doesn't need a real victory. He needs the appearance of it. Ukraine needs a real victory. They're going to know the difference. So the question is, how do you negotiate that? So assuming we land somewhere where and NATO's perfectly happy. I think NATO doesn't really give a shit what the average Russian thinks. So if we can give Putin a victory that strengthens his hand at home, but helps our allies, it's like, okay, you go ahead and you go do that, and you take your appearance, and we'll take the real victory if we can. Let's assume that that's done, and Ukraine is somehow settled. So I'm talking, it may still be even years in the future. We've got this problem, which is we still have this mindset in Russia. We still have a similar mindset in China, but I would say far more organized, far more determined, and but the same dictatorial or authoritarian mindset. What is it we can do? Is the idea really that, well, the Western system is the better one, and the better ideas will over time win and rise to the top, or is this just a problem that we're going to have to keep facing?
I think it's a problem we're going to have to keep facing unless we have leadership that looks further downstream than the next election cycle. So one of the things when we came out of World War II, where we had crushed the fascist states, is that we set up occupations in those states, in Germany, Japan, and Italy, and brought those countries into the democratic representative democracy fold. It took a lot of willpower to essentially continue that war after we had won it in order to effect that systemic level of change that we would not have to face these countries again as authoritarian enemies. I don't know if our population today is willing to bear that burden with Russia if it came to that. Assume that somehow the war expands, NATO gets involved, we destroy Russia. What happens after that? Now, logically, if you wanted to set a situation up where Russia would enter the family of, Western-style nations with representative government, you divide the country up into occupation zones, and everybody would sit there and work together and trying to set up the governmental and societal infrastructure that would permit that kind of thing to grow naturally within the country. But I don't see any consensus among NATO governments, let alone even the US itself within the United States, of being able to say, yeah, that's something that's worth doing. We want the mission accomplished banner on the bridge, so the boys can come home, we hold the victory parade, and everybody goes back to eating fast, watching movies.
I think China would argue that that's why their system is superior, is because they can keep someone in office long enough to direct the country in that way. I would argue that once they can feed all their own citizens, that maybe they can start to try to make that argument. But first, babies shouldn't be starving to death. All right. Do you think that if we had allowed Russia into NATO, Soviet Union, into NATO, that would have been a good idea and prevented this, or do you think it was a wise idea to keep them out? Prevented this is, what I mean, shorthand for it would have changed things.
I think it would not have changed anything other than we now have a plethora of Soviet/Russian spies running around the NATO headquarters.
So essentially, in the same way that Russia being a part of the Security Council has not been productive.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
All right.
I mean, in the lead up to Operation Iraqi Freedom, there were a number of coalition partners, potential partners, I should more accurately say, who were going to be on board. And when we held our highest level classified briefings, their liaison officers were invited in to sit in on those meetings. So there would be British officers present, there would be Australian officers present, there would be Polish officers present, that kind of stuff. At some point during that process, before we started getting ready to go, Canada said, we've reconsidered, we don't want to go in with you and invade Iraq. We don't see a justification for going to war. And I mean, almost, I won't even say overnight, like within the hour, the Canadian liaison officer was escorted politely from the building. And that's the issue you get with any kind of high-level ties, like a NATO or organization. You have to have faith in and trust that alliance partner. And the moment you get somewhere that you don't trust them, that you think that they may not be thinking in the same terms you are, then you're kind of forced to put them outside. Doesn't mean they're your enemy. It doesn't mean that the U.S. was getting ready to invade Canada or some idiotic thing like that. It just meant that you're not part of the club. So, this is the all boys, no girls allowed treehouse. That was kind of what was going on. And if you have a Russia that joins NATO you end up with that inherently within the mix, and then you get naturally occurring tiers. So there's the top tier of U.S. and Britain, and there's a second tier where maybe we let France and Poland and Germany. And when you start doing that, then you're setting up the same set of pre-World War I alliances of people expecting different things from the Allies. That's the nice thing about NATO, the way it currently is organized. While it doesn't expressly state that Russia is a threat, everybody knows that's what the whole organization exists from, counter to the Russian threat.
So wait a minute, are you suggesting that the U.S. should not have invaded Canada for burning down the White House?
We hired some Irish guys, gave them some whiskey, and told them to give it a try, and it didn't work. So,
so we just get okay. I'm just saying, the new Trump brand history textbooks are I hear hitting the schools, and I don't know if you saw this. Sinister Porpoise said, alcohol and calculus.
Some folks are saying. Some folks are saying in the chat room, but Canada does go to Afghanistan. Yeah, and they also went into Iraq after. They just didn't want to be part of the invasion force. The occupation force trying to, peacekeeping, which arguably the Canadian Army is the world's premier army for peacekeeping operations. Better than anybody else.
A, it's because they're so polite, and B, it's because they have the best snipers on the planet, as far as I understand it. I'm not kidding about the snipers.
No. But it's a different mindset, and it's also because that's how they structured their force, and that's how they see their involvement in the world external to their own borders. Is we want to establish peace. The U.S. basically is the policeman. We go in with the gun drawn and billy club in the other hand, and I don't care if you don't have a gun. You look like you're suspicious. I'm going to beat the living crap out of you.
So the Canadians basically go in and say, "We didn't invade your country, eh? We're sorry for the invasion. Just try to work with us, and we'll all be nice and friendly." And,
what is that accent?
I really don't know. I have to actually prep an accent before.
Pakistani.
It probably was. I have to, if I can do accents, I can usually do them pretty well, but I have to prepare them. If I don't, then it's just you get whatever the hell that was. We'll say it was. That's the nice thing about So speaking of authoritarian. The nice thing about In Time is that I have complete control of all the things, so I can just shut down those we just lost Lance, I don't know what happened, but it was absolutely a Canadian accent, and I'm sure if he could agree with that, we could get him back on the show without any difficulty.
Okay.
I'm going to get a copy of that clip from Red Tide. We're here
this is my chasing dog face.
I can't keep that out. I can't keep that. I can't do that. I'm going to get the clip from Red Tide or Crimson Tide. And I'll play that any time that I get some blowback. What we'll do is we'll say, it's like we're here to protect democracy, son, not to practice it. So
there are you can't handle the truth.
You can't handle exactly.
So many lines out of relatively recent movies where that kind of issue really gets brought to the fore of the military people doing good, honest work, but at the same time thinking that they aren't bound by the same set of rules that govern the society, a representative society. And occasionally you see that in the office, or you wonder, how far is this asshole going to rise? Is this a good idea? Shouldn't this guy be sweeping up trash on the Main Street somewhere?
Well, and you mentioned the police too. We had on Pat Yeah, we had Pat on, and that was an eye opener what he had to say, and that was, I think, one of our best shows. She's just got a DM from Dick. He's like, we need that image of the cat trying to assassinate Donald Trump. I love that one. The cat just jumping right at the screen. I was just like, it's like if the cat heard what he said about Ohio. Cats. Yeah, exactly. The cat's like, no, we're eating the politicians. I don't know what accent that one was either. That was my evil cat accent. So the thanks, Dick. Dick knows. Dick, here's the thing too, which is what I like to do is when the shills are going, I like to just send Dick messages like, oh, dude, I had a pretty good day today. What's going on? He's like, Nick, we're streaming. It's like, oh, and I see him like right there. And I see him typing. He's like, we're streaming. Like, oh, I had no idea. Sorry. And then I just wait 5 minutes. Is there a better time I could reach you? And I just keep it. It's like a Dick is. I'm that way too, though. It's just all those. It's like squirrel.
Keep poking the bear.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If Dick really wants to mess with me, I'm gonna. Oh dear Lord. So yeah.
Actually,
Anyways, thanks for.
Bear wears himself.
Yeah. Yes. Especially when it's Dick. You can poke Dick a lot, and he's, I just realized I'm starting to get very uncomfortable with this conversation, and I'm not entirely sure why. So we're going to move on. At any rate, let's say that Putin gets ill. He gets a severe case of sudden deceleration poisoning, which is the result of sudden collision with asphalt after falling out of a 23rd story window. The condition is fatal, and there is no Putin anymore. Now, we've talked about this before. This was another one where you really educated me on this one, which is that, unfortunately, while there may be a couple of potential replacements that would be better than him, most of them are either just like him or even worse. We've seen some of them who have essentially said that, I sit there and I say, look, they're committing genocide. And there was that guy, I forget where he was from, but he was just like, oh, he's like, no, we're not committing genocide. We should be. He's like, why aren't we just like murdering all of them? And he's like, we have to go in and murder the civilians. This is what the guy was saying. So, and he was a contender for power. I think he's. Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, it's worth trying to watch the movie Death of Stalin.
Ooh.
Because it's a comedy, but it's based to a large extent on fact. And one of the things you see happening when Stalin suddenly dies, nobody's expecting him to die. He's found effectively dead on the floor in his office. The way the situation develops of who's trying, all the guys in the top tier were fighting with one another to try to assume the mantle of power. And everybody expects that it's going to be Beria, who's the head of the KGB at the time. And the majority of the people in the Politburo know that if Beria gets power, he's going to have all of them executed the next moment, because they're a threat to him. So they have to do their own kind of internal palace coup, and they drag him out and bump him off in a show trial kind of affair to make him go away so that you can have an orderly transition of power. And I think if you find the scenario that you postulated of Putin falling out the window, that's what's going to happen, is that inner circle of oligarchs, the guys who are the ones who are making the day-to-day decisions about what goes on inside Russia. They will start a Scrabble fight of who gets brass key that got dropped. And some of those people are worse than the guy that just fell out the window. So going back to the Death of Stalin analogy, what happens if Beria is the one that everybody expected was going to take power, ends up coming to power? You get a true monster. Not saying Stalin wasn't, but I mean, there's bosses and then there are bosses.
Well, I mean, we've talked about, yeah, please.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that you end up with a situation when this occurs, nobody really knows what's going on inside those behind the door Kremlin office building discussions in big air quotes, to figure out who's going to come out on top. We might get lucky. It might be somebody who has some sort of vision on how to bring Russia back into at least partially the world fold, but in all likelihood, it'll just be somebody with the same mentality as Putin. The only thing that makes it better, so to speak, for us is that whoever that guy is doesn't have the baggage that Putin is carrying right now. That guy can turn around and say, okay, we will pull out of all the occupied territories in Ukraine, and you get them back and we get a permanent peace. But we want these conditions in place. Ukraine cannot join NATO, et cetera, et cetera. That way, he can put up that mission accomplished banner on the wall of the Kremlin, you know, hey, I ended the war, look how great I am, and still claim that he got victory because Ukraine isn't in NATO. I'm just using this as an example, please understand. But that's what's going to likely happen when Putin goes. Is we'll get somebody who's of the same ilk. The only difference is he's not carrying the same set of luggage that Putin is right now.
So we know that there's a number of areas in Russia that are dissatisfied with being still in Russia. And right now, the military, as it turns out, is occupied, being the second best military in Ukraine. And so if there's an opportunity like that, what do you think is the possibility that we may see enough confusion that there's some of the smaller areas break off and try to form either their own district or their own satellite state of some sort, or just completely their own country?
I think that could possibly happen, particularly in some of the more remote areas. Down into the Caucasus region, because we saw the first set of breakaways with Armenia and Georgia and such. There are a couple other ethnic groups in there that have been clamoring for independent representation. I could see that happening. You get some in Central Asia, the same kind of thing. But again, those are countries that have been occupied so long, been part of the Russian Empire so long, that the only foundation for a government coming out of that mess is going to be the same kind of authoritarian strongman regime. And you see that with the various Stan brothers, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. They're all ruled by autocrats. And so, will it happen? Possibly. But does it change the dynamic? No, they're still living under repressive regimes, and those repressive regimes have extremely close ties with the regime in Moscow. Kind of like where we see Belarus today.
But we have seen some successful breakaways, Ukraine being one of them, and so is I guess what I'm hinting at is we're looking at these two genuinely different views of the world, and I think Putin truly believes that the best way to run a country in the way that humanity is best served is in this authoritarian way. I think his judgment is in part influenced by the fact that he's the dictator. So it's self-serving, but I'm not trying. Now, Netanyahu, for example, I don't think believes that that's the best way to run a government. He just thinks that's the best way to stay out of prison. So I think there's the ideologue dictator and the dictator who's doing it to survive for one reason or another. Putin, I think, truly does believe that the world would be a better place if everything fell under the Soviet system, for lack of a better way, or the Russian system. So, given that we've got these two ideologies, I guess I'm trying to figure out short of war or some form of economic collapse, we had, as you said, a chance when the Soviet Union collapsed. They did take on capitalism, but the culture stayed the same. So I think there was a book, I'm trying to remember, it was a while ago, but talked about basically the missed opportunity was that we had expected both the economic and the social systems would change simultaneously, and the economic system evolved, but the social system stayed identical, and that kind of surprised people. So I'm just wondering if...
I want to address two things.
Please.
I want to address two things. First off, some people in the chat stream are saying, yeah, but what about the Baltic states? What about the former Warsaw Pact countries, etc.? Most of those countries had at least some tradition back in their ethnic history of being sort of quasi-representative of a different style of government. And that's why it was more likely than not that they would develop into countries that could have that sort of system. Many of the places we're talking about that are closer into the core of the Russian area don't have those traditions. They've lived under Russian rule for so long and never had their own rule that they have trouble visualizing it. The second issue on that is that I think many of the Russian people saw that opportunity when the wall came down and were very quickly soured on the concept of becoming a representative capitalist society, because what, from their viewpoint, this experience was different than what we from the outside saw. From the outside, we saw former Soviet stores which had empty shelves and everybody stood in long queues with the little coupon that allowed them to get bread or margarine or whatever it was that week. And then suddenly the stores were full of merchandise. The trouble was nobody had money to buy any of that merchandise except for the extremely wealthy oligarch class. And my dad went to visit his KGB counterpart in Moscow during that period. And that was almost exactly what the guy told him. He said, yes, there's a lot more merchandise available. We see all of this wonderful stuff, but none of us can afford this. People are out there on the streets selling, their father's wartime medals for the Great Patriotic War, which one would expect to be in an honored box on the mantelpiece for everybody to look at the heroism he displayed. And instead, they're forced into selling that so they can feed their family. It was to them, capitalism and democracy were a humiliation. It wasn't an opportunity to rise out of the abyss. It was somebody rubbing your nose in the abyss, saying, this is where you belong.
Damn. Yeah. I do remember that. Again, I was young, but we when we were there, the ruble was, I think it was $1 to 200 rubles, but the ruble, whatever you could buy for, the prices when we were there actually translated very well. So, something that was $1 here was 1 ruble over there, roughly, when we went over there. But the difference in the standard of living allowed the dollar to, at a bank. This is not on the black market, which is, as it turns out, like I thought the black market would be like this hidden. Oh no, you just walk out right into the street. That's like, I got some dollars to trade. People are like, here you go. I'll give you 300.
I got a $20 bill. Who wants it?
It was insane. Oh my God, I've never seen any of that. And we had two American not tour guides, but they were because it was actually the summer camp that did this thing, and it's like they're Americans and they had been here before, so they knew how the system works. They're like, yeah, we're going to go to the black market. It's over there, and I'm just sitting there going, we're going to do what? I was like, yeah, well, we have to. We need to get shit, and that's the only place to get it. So it was like part of the authorized is just like, they're taking 16, 17, 18-year-old, guys down to the black market, and Oh yeah, some guy was trying to sell me a Soviet watch, and he said, $5 for this watch. And I was just like, no, thank you, not interested. $1 for this watch. Went from 5 to 1, and would have been delighted at the because the average at that point, if I recall, the average income was 34 rubles a month. So they were making 34 rubles a month. 1 ruble would get you about what $1 would here. And the exchange rate was 1 to 300 if you went to the bank, and you could get 400 or 500 if you. Yeah. So our bus broke down, and I calculated that basically if everybody chipped in a $1.50, we could buy a brand new bus. Now it would have taken would have been on an 11-year waiting list, but
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But I was just sitting there going we just want to buy a new bus. Everybody here chip in a $1.50, brand new bus. We're good to go. So now, thank you for telling me that story, because now I feel like a schmuck for saying it.
No. I think it's important to point this out, is if you wanted to put it in a global political context, the U.S. won the Cold War and then proceeded to lose the peace immediately following. And it was because
We
of
have a history of doing
short-mindedness.
that.
Yeah. And it's short-mindedness. It's because we look to the quarterly profit and loss statement. We don't have a 5-year or 10-year plan. It just doesn't exist in this system.
That is one of the there's no perfect system. What is it they say about democracy? It's the worst system invented, except for every other one. So
Yeah, I've heard a number of different variations on the quote. The one I like the best is attributed to Churchill, which is, if my child goes to university and does not become a communist, I will doubt his intelligence. If he is still a communist when he returns from university, I will know he is an idiot.
I love that one. The other one is attributed to Churchill. The best argument against democracy is 5 minutes spent talking to the average voter.
Yeah. A lot of truth there.
And then the last one that is not attributed to Churchill, I forget who did this one. If you're not a Democrat when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brain. Which I would take some issue with, but having said that, it's an interesting perspective. So basically, I'll ask you one other question, and then I think there's a lot more to mine on the Russia thing, so I don't know where we'll go if we're going to continue past this, but I'll ask you this question. First of all, I had sent you a while back a video of a general talking about how different armies fight, and it never really crossed my mind. I just sort of thought, as the naive guy who has never been in the military, the naive civilian, that all militaries kind of fought the same way. It's like, you get guns, you got ammo, you got to, yeah, I can see you shaking your head like, oh, you poor.
Keep digging the hole. Go on.
Oh, shit. So, okay, when you're in the hole, first thing you do is stop digging, at least if you have a brain. Having said that, since I'm the one without the brain, I'm going to dig a little more and say, so I sent you this video that was talking about how the Brits actually fight a war, and very different than how the Canadians fight a war, than how the Germans fight a war, and how the U.S. fights a war. And one of the things that he said was, the U.S. is best when we enter a war late and are back on our heels. He said if we have the advantage, we blow it every single time. We're basically a military that works based on morale. So somebody who is good with, Patton, a lot of leadership hated him, but you can't get rid of him because he was so good for morale and the troops, loved him so much that's what the war. Now he might have been able to have in a different army, if he was doing shit that was pissing off the people above him, maybe you could do something. But in the U.S., no, because he provided what was most effective and needed in the American style of fighting. So I wanted to get your take on that, and is that at all, has that got anything to do also with our inability to follow through? Because even with, I mean, the victory in Iraq, we didn't have a plan for what to do afterwards, and you didn't even need a 5-year plan. You could have had a just one-term plan where Bush could have sat there and said, "Okay, this is how we're going to deal with it," and he was pleaded with. I remember generals saying, "We will do this for you. Have an exit strategy," and he's like, "Oh, we'll have an exit strategy. Well, no worries, we'll have an exit strategy." It's like just the fact that he'll say, he said, as he's talking about the attack, that we will have one. Yeah,
something like the Republican replacement for Medicare.
Exactly. Oh God, when the guy came up and said, "Here's their plan."
Promises and hot air.
Their plan to replace Medicare. You get sick, you die, they don't need to treat you. Oh dear Lord. So how does, in your view, if at all, the mindset of the U.S. military influence? I mean, it certainly seems like, I mean, in that case, it was absolutely Bush's fault because he absolutely did not have an exit strategy. Are we better at the policeman tactics? We go in, we arrest everybody, beat everybody up that looks suspicious, and then get the hell out of Dodge, or is it something more or less than that?
I think we have a tendency to get involved in things that we don't need to be involved with because it suits the current internal domestic situation needs of the leadership. So why did we get involved in Vietnam? Why did we get involved in Iraq? That kind of thing. It leaves you wondering, was there an actual strategy of what we were trying to accomplish? And I think that's the key is from the start. We just, in many cases, decide that, oh, well, this is the best thing to do because we can get rid of this regime that we don't like. And then nobody thinks to ask the question, well, what's going to replace that regime when you depart? And when are you planning to depart? You know, what are the conditions for you walking in, shooting Saddam in the head and then driving off? Who do you think is going to replace Saddam? Or Q or Diem or whatever. You know, it's all the same kind of thing. It's military strategy is left, or should be left, arguably, to strategists. But in Western democratic style government, that's something that's put on the political side as opposed to the military side. And the political side has not been educated, if you will, in strategy. Now, when the system works, as you noted, when we're suddenly brought in late at a disadvantage, civilian leadership turns to the military and says, shit, we don't know what to do. How do we get ourselves out of this mess? And the military comes up with a plan and says, okay, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to solve these problems. And then we do it. And the civilian government basically does what it can to support bringing that strategy to fruition. And I think what tends to happen on the other side when we let civilians dictate strategy is that you get involved where you don't need to be for reasons you don't need to be going there. Does that make any sense?
That makes a lot of sense, and I think there was Vietnam is a beautiful example of that, and I think that we but actually a better example really is Iraq, where it was he tried to kill my pappy, and you know, we're going to go after this murderous dictator who, while, you know, 10,000 are dying a month in Darfur. I mean, and I remember that time. I remember too. They're like, the French have never done anything for us. I'm just like, wow. Name one nice thing the French did. I don't know. I'll let you know when I get back from the visiting the Statue of Liberty and Well, they've never helped us militarily. No, they certainly weren't involved in like the Revolutionary War or anything like that. Listen, if the French weren't involved,
who's this Lafayette guy you keep talking about?
If the French did not involve themselves in the Revolutionary War, would all be speaking, well, English right now, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The thing you were bringing up about how different armies fight.
Yeah.
There was a joke at one point where supposedly they asked a German officer during World War II, when you see enemies on the horizon, how do you know who you're up against? Because you have so many different enemies right now. He says, well, it's quite simple. We fire a shot in their direction. Just one shot. And then we know who they are based on how they react to that one shot. So what do you mean? Well, for example, if they're French, we fire a shot, they all throw down their guns and surrender, then, we know they're French. If we take the shot at them and they charge us en masse, then we know they're Russians. If we take the shot or replied with a fusillade of very well-aimed musketry or rifle shots, they're British. That's the way the British. And if we fire a shot and nothing happens for 15 minutes, and then suddenly the hill we're on explodes, we know we're fighting Americans.
Oh, dear Lord. I know I'm going to help.
That was often the American response. Yeah, that was often the American response is, yeah, somebody from that hill shot at me. Okay, fire the entire corps artillery at that hill. Oh, the hill has ceased to exist. No more shots being taken at us. Wonderful.
I know I'm going to hell for this, but why are French tanks so cheap to make? Because they only have to go in reverse. That's terribly unfair to the call.
I'm enough of a military. I know I'm enough of a military story that I honestly get pissed when I hear people criticize the French performance in World War II, because they had soldiers who fought very bravely. The problem was they were led by commanders who were complete blithering idiots. And
it was also
it had more to do with the French social structure than it did with the courage of the average Frenchman.
And again, the government, if I recall, that was making decisions as opposed to.
Yeah, one of my favorites is the German Luftwaffe wipes out most of the French aviation at the start of the war on the ground. The French actually had more aircraft than the Luftwaffe did at the start of the war. The problem was they figured out, if we buy airplanes but don't train pilots to fly these planes, we get lots of planes and it looks great on paper. So that's what happened. So basically every pilot had 3 planes that he could have gotten into, but half the planes were sitting on the ground because there weren't anybody to fly them. And it was, we want to foster the French aviation industry. So we're going to funnel money into that. And training pilots doesn't do that. So we're not going to. It was a very bizarre situation. And you look at the number of times the French government changes during the 30s, and it's mind-boggling. It's like one guy's inside taking the oath of the office, and the other guy's leaving the building at the same time, and they just keep the thing going every day. Somebody else is taking the oath of office as the other guy's leaving the building. It's ridiculous.
We need to do a show, you and I, and as Andrew, I think we'll do it on the main show, where we're going to talk about what really happened in France during World War II. Because when you take a look at how much they had to suffer through and how the resistance, they actually never stopped fighting. It was like after the collapse of everything, they actually kept fighting. For me, and that's why I try to be careful with it, because it's like I said before, without the French, the French were our biggest allies for a very long time, and that whole freedom fries thing really ticked me off, because I'm sitting there going, do you know anything about history that you're getting pissed at the French for like being friends and telling us that we're about to do something really fucking stupid? But so we're going to need to schedule a show where we get into that, because that is one that I think, especially in the U.S., is maybe the playful ribbing may not be a good idea in a country that isn't educated enough to realize. Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, so we're here every week. So for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, you know what? We're gonna come back, and sometimes we're laughing our asses off the whole time. Sometimes we're talking about, we're catching up on topics we haven't talked about in a while, because we've been going for a while. If you like the show, you know what, the like, subscribe, all that stuff really helps. That's why we ask for it. You know, we don't ask for it because it's inconsequential. None of us like to ask for it. You can also become a patron, become a member. There's a lot of members in the live chat, and I'm just so pleased, and I really appreciate the people who do that. I'm also aware that not everyone can become a member. Join the Discord, check it out, see what we do, talk to us about shows you'd like to see. Lance is down there, so if you'd like to give him a hard time, I always strongly encourage that. So come on down. Yeah, don't give me a hard time. I don't. But Lance is fine. So thank you all for joining us with that, and we would like to again thank all of our mods, all of the people who have been supporting us for so long, and even, you know what, we were away and people were still doing research. They were on Titan's Discord and still keeping this up on their own. So I've been a little humbled and privileged that people have continued this work, and that we get to come back and continue it ourselves. So thank you, Lance, for joining us once again. We are also
everywhere.
We are also looking to get I'd like to get Pat back on a couple of things. The police issue was one.
Yeah.
You and I need to talk about that, but we also are looking to hopefully get on a few other people, a few other Ukrainians who are right in the thick of it, and also some other good guests that we've been looking at. And if you want to know more, join us on the Discord. If you don't, well, we appreciate you hanging with us, and we will see you guys next time. Lance, thank you one last time, and we will have a good night all.